As a lover of all things fantasy, whenever I get the opportunity to expand my horizons and experience a new world with new set of characters, I immediately jump at the opportunity. So when they were making a new animated movie, I was one of the first ones in line to see the animated movie Scarlet. Now, when I go into new movies, I do not look up the content. I don't usually even watch most trailers. I simply allow the movie itself to show me what it's got. No expectations, no hype. I like to try to give them a fair shake. So I went down, grabbed my local box of popcorn, and sat down to watch this movie. Oh man, let's talk about that movie. It had me looking around a theater, making eye contact with total strangers, slightly confirming that we were still in the real world. And that, yes, we both just saw that. However, this movie was the greatest commercial for peyote I've ever seen in my life. Because, in essence, the only way you can actually enjoy this movie is if you had a heavy dose of something hallucinogenic. Because the movie is definitely designed with the intention of so much subversion and degradation of most styles of writing and plot development that I had no idea what's going on for the vast majority of this movie. Which says a lot since I have a 5-year science degree and I would consider myself at least above average in intelligence. This movie made me severely question that. But before we get into the meat and potatoes, let's start with a little spoiler-free explanation. Scarlet follows a young princess whose father is taken from her by power-hungry conspirators. She spends her entire life sharpening herself into a weapon, training, fighting, preparing for the day she may take revenge and reclaim what was stolen from her. But when the moment finally came, one mistake cost her everything. And then she wakes up in, well, something. That leads me straight into the first major gripe I have for this movie. The world, quote unquote, she wakes up in has about 100 different interpretations. And the witch, demon, whatever lady who follows Scarlet around cannot decide which one she wants to commit to. It's like the movie keeps pitching new metaphysical rules every 10 minutes, hoping you won't notice. The world is described as purgatory, later it's described as the afterlife, then it's described as an alternative world, then it's described as a new dimensionality, basically purgatory for those that aren't Christian. Then it describes itself as the in-between, and then simply leaves it at that. Basically making sure the audience doesn't, or hopes the audience at least, doesn't keep asking about where they are, because it might actually burden the writers from taking away from their acid trips to be able to actually tell a story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In general, the story about Scarlet is basically a revenge plot, and an effort for having the princess, who had failed not once but twice to save her father, has given a third opportunity to be able to stop the enemies and evils that are committed against her and her bloodline. Let's start with the positives of the movie. I like to try to go things in that kind of light first before we demolish things. So first of all, Scarlet is one of the best examples I have seen in the modern day of incredibly good, strong female character writing. She is, by all nature, likable, interesting, graceful, strong, compelling, intelligent, reasonable, respectful, and in most cases, she is a badass while it makes sense for her to be a badass. In other words, she is able to make fights that make sense to her. She doesn't win infinite all the battles against all the male characters and all this nonsense. She changes things to her advantage. She uses the environment to her advantage. She takes the high ground. She makes very smart combat decisions that makes her incredibly interesting to watch. Outside of the combat, she is incredibly interesting to talk to. Her dilemmas are very heartfelt and innocent. She still comes off as an actual woman, as in most modern writing, when tend to write female characters, are just toxically male men. You know, like the old version of what feminism usually described what toxic masculinity is, was basically just the strong female character. Stoic, aggressive, violent, egotistical, narcissistic, bad leader, none of it. Scarlet shows none of the negative tropes that we see in modern writing when it comes to female characters. And she instantly got skyrocketed to my top 5 favorite female badass characters. And she has well deserved it. The only reason I was able to make it through the entirety of this movie is how incredibly well written and interesting the character is. She, without a doubt, carried that movie on her shoulders. And if it wasn't for how well they had written Scarlet and how well her voice actor did, there's no way I would have been able to get through the entirety of that movie, because most of the time it felt absolutely nonsensical. Combat aspect, or of the incredible work of Scarlet. I had found the set pieces and set designs to be rather interesting. There was a huge variation from something that looked like coming out of Dune, from different fantasy-esque worlds to medieval Renaissance-esque worlds, all kinds of very interesting dynamics that I'd say I was getting lost in. There was an incredible amount of diversity when it came to that kind of world building outside of the actual writing or where they actually were, but the different set designs, that it did feel like we were traversing these different points in time, these different points in the story. It really did. You went on the journey with Scarlet throughout. Outside of that, the voice acting was pretty good. It had some rather strange moments. If anything, I had found it a little bit weird, as the animation style would present itself in an incredible amount of inclusivity. Not in inclusivity in the sense of like social brownie points, but in the effort of expanding the different warriors of different timelines through the different centuries that all seem to end up in this world, in this apocalyptic Valhalla, if you will. And throughout it, we see so many diversity of characters. However, we don't really hear a lot of diversity of voices. Characters from Africa, Hawaii, United States, Japan, etc. all tend to sound like we all are homogenous. And I thought it was rather strange. If you're going to spend the time to really diversify your cast of characters and show off incredible amounts of conflict associated with all these different warriors from all these different lands, you would have thought they would have fed into the voices more, so that you would not only saw animated versions of different people throughout the world, but you also got to experience their voices, their patterns of speech being different, the ways they're interpreted are different. Maybe language barriers. Maybe this world just puts us all in the same language, or even though if they say it in one language, you hear it in another. There were so many interesting opportunities they could have had for that, and I felt like it was a missed one. All right, I'm done being nice. Let's take a steaming shit on this show. Let's start with main character number 2. The movie offers a pacifist-esque character known as main character number 2, the male character, the love interest. Does he have a name? Of course he does. They tell you a whole, maybe twice in the whole story. She never uses his main name when talking to him. So if the movie doesn't even bother to tell me more than like once, why should I remember? Anyways, so they give you this character that is a quote-unquote pacifist character. He's a healer, he's a nurse in real life, and he's offering his own services in an effort to help those that are dying in a world that's kind of already dying, that is dead. Again, the movie can't decide where they are or what they're doing. Anyways, the problem with that is that this character does not adhere to its own ideological basis in which he is supposed to. He is, by nature, hurting people, and he is allowing Scarlet to hurt people. And his offers to help people ends up being fruitless in most cases, because people just disappear when they, die. While in real life, that's not how this works. People can be helped, people can be healed, people's bodies healed. The movie never clarifies whether or not when he helps people, it actually helps. And in most cases, people that were injured at the start of the movie are still injured by the end of the movie with the same injuries, which means that he actually didn't help anybody, thus making his entire character basically fruitless. This also leads into this second gripe I have for the story, is that I can't decide if it is actually a revenge plot. See, the author, or the writers associated with this, wanted to paint the picture of you of both sides of whether or not a revenge plot is actually a revenge plot, which by nature, I was ecstatic about when I started seeing, because it means the author is not there to try to tell us who's right and wrong, and is simply offering both sides of the conversation in an effort to allow the audience to make the decision. Something that I'm a huge fan of, and is a huge, huge aspect of traditional fantasy. To talk about things in a morally gray, not necessarily that there isn't a right or wrong, but allows the audience to determine what is right or wrong. The problem with it is they are afraid to commit to anything in this movie. In essence, when you decide to make a character or a individual an aspect of either the plot point or a specific moral behavior in which you would like to show the full ramifications of, you must adhere to it fully. When you write this, however, you have to maintain the individual morality of said character throughout the entirety of the story, or you break down the moral fibers in which you're trying to build for the audience. You basically sacrifice individual growth of a character so that the audience can be able to see both sides of the conversation and be able to offer their own opinions post movie, or, amongst themselves, when deciding whether or not Scarlet was right or main character number 2 was right. Since they make main character number 2 actually go back on his word and actually hurt people, it completely devolves the argument of whether or not one character should adhere to another. Oh, but they're just giving us character development, you may say. That's not how you create a divisive side-by-side comparison between two moral dilemmas. Especially because the moral dilemma is supposed to be a foundational and fundamental piece for the character. The moment he breaks it, or she would have broken it, let's say she became passive, it would have completely devolved the character and make them nonsensical, because you develop most of their personality around the adherence to their moral behavior. Now, when we get the full backstory of said main character number 2, it makes sense on why he would become violent towards the end, especially because he did end up dying in the first world. However, the reason he died is because he sacrificed himself to save children, making the kind of weird argument that he wasn't willing to defend himself, but that really wasn't the case. He was literally just shielding his body from a knife-wielding maniac. So again, it doesn't really make sense. How was he supposed to defend himself? Was he carrying a gun that we don't know about, or his own weapon? Because the show shows very clearly that he is a first responder. And in most cases, first responders, especially those that are EMTs, paramedics, nurses, things like that, do not carry weapons. So unless he had a scalpel hiding somewhere, the whole argument that he was just finishing his character arc didn't make any sense. So it starts with the revenge plot of Scarlet tracking down the 4 men that took away her father. And in the process of that, she somehow gets allies with 2 of them because she spares their life. Why does she spare their life? Because the pacifist character tells her, hey, you should not kill them. And she goes, okay, and doesn't kill them. It seems rather strange of a decision, but it turns out that it was very important to the plot, as if the pacifist main character read the script beforehand. Anyways, the story continues with Scarlet finding out that they are on a long journey and getting the information they need to get all the way to Evil King Guy so that they can take revenge on him because he's trying to get to heaven or something, because the character Witch Demon Lady tells us there is no heaven, but then the Evil King finds a way to heaven, which for the most of the movie makes it seem like he's crazy and that actually there isn't a way, but it turns out he was actually right the whole time, which makes me question, again, who this evil witch demon lady is. Throughout it, they also get an element in which characters don't have magic, other than demon ghost lady. However, Scarlet decides to look into a fire while listening to the nurse guy who's trying to convince her that killing is bad. She then asks a really simple question like, in your future, is there still war? And he's like, well, yes. And she's like, haha, I have won this battle. And he's like, okay, I guess maybe killing isn't such a bad thing. And it's like, what is this? Never mind. Just keep going in your plot, right? Anyways, she looks into the fire and she gets alternate powers or something. Basically, she's able to see into his world, and she sees a scene of, well, it's supposed to be Japan, but the whole thing feels more like a Bollywood music video where everyone's like singing and dancing to like really cheesy music that sounds like a combination of K-pop, boy bands, and like with the moms. Oh, Mamma Mia. It sounds like if you put those 3 kinds of music styles together, in other words, it's awful. The animation also is pretty cringy because they at least spend enough time so that you're not looking at the same 3 character types every single time, but you do basically spend most of the time looking at the same repeated maybe 5. So it's a very awkward scene, and not only does it not make sense, but it was the point in which I started looking around the movie theater, making sure everyone else saw it too, because we weren't sure if it was the same movie. See, tone is very important when writing different types of dramas, conflicts, resolutions, etc. When you a Mamma Mia sequence in the middle of a fantasy drama, you completely pull your whole audience out of the plot and no one knows what the fuck is going on. We all start getting really confused. Not only do you shift your tone so violently, we don't know what's going on, but you basically make fun of yourself because it shows you have an inability to adhere to one aspect or one individual tone when you write, which is basically level 2 writing in most cases. Level 1 writing is being able to tell the story Bob went to the store. Level 2 writing is being able to adhere tone, such as him driving quickly to the store, panic in his eyes, his sweat forms across his forehead, oh, why is he such in a hurry to get to the store? That's tone. You, speaking to the authors of this atrocity, have no idea how to write tone, and it becomes very obvious watching your movie. You never know what's going on, and you can never adhere to the same thing. The movie also does this quite often, where they put you in these acid trip-like metaphysical, metaphorical analyses that is looking at the different dynamics of the conversations, flashing you with a bunch of endless imagery. I hate it so much because it's basically an excuse for a writer not to actually explain what's going on and just flash you a bunch of random images and then basically just saying, look, it made sense in the beginning because I made this random line of dialogue that now makes the flash of her seeing all blood now makes sense. No, you didn't. You knew the end of your script, and you had no way to connect several of your flashy images and plot points, so you throw in random behaviors of random characters to try to make it make sense by the end. In most cases, it doesn't. You are randomly throwing in information from character voices that doesn't even adhere to what you originally said was the behavior behind these metaphysical environments, because the witch lady tries to help Scarlet interpret them, but she does it so poorly that it ends up being the opposite at the end of the movie that it meant at the start of the movie, because again, the authors, the writers, the script writers, the animators can't actually make up their mind of what they wanted to write. I apologize, I went through a little bit of a sidetrack. Moving on. Scarlet continues her journey, seeing different cultures in different worlds, all competing with one another, and of violent displays of barbarism, usually between warriors. However, they do add a bunch of old people into the scene and a bunch of children in another scene that doesn't quite make sense to the rules in which they stick or they gave at the beginning of the movie. But again, they never care. They just do whatever they want. So we see the aspect of violence, and we get this really shoehorned in level of moral dilemma in which the pacifist character tries to non-violently stop one group of raiders from attacking a group of what we find out later is low-level raiders, whom then gets attacked by even stronger raiders with guns. And the analogy is basically threefold. One of them is basically the savage versus the colonizer. The next one is an analogy for the violence of men. And then there's another analogy for... You could basically drown yourself in analogies in this movie. Don't even try. I was originally writing the script, I was going to try to write out all the different analogies, but I realized after 45 minutes and not even making through 10 minutes of the script, there was no way I was going to be able to do that. So instead, I'll just let you know, everything has 17 layers of metaphysical meta-analysis on real-world interpretation, which can be interpreted 7 different ways. The main characters will adhere to one ideology and then shift to the opposite by the end of the movie, which means if you even decided it was one or the other, basically the movie tells you it doesn't matter, which I feel like that is really the whole point of this movie, is to tell you everything you think of doesn't matter. The behavior you act doesn't matter. Scarlet's revenge doesn't matter. And the weird part is by the end of the movie, she actually gets an opportunity to take her revenge. And she gets an analysis from one of the other characters in which she missed the final words from her father. And the analysis basically said that he said the word forgive. And the person's opinion was that she was telling him to forgive the person that hurt him originally, because he sees that his brother, the one that hurt him, spoilers, and it's not much of a spoiler, you find out in the first 30 seconds of the movie, that he inevitably adheres to this ideological basis of the need for consumption of power. Basically, power corrupts, except the brother had no power, so he was just automatically corrupt because he had the opportunity of power. Oh, and the wife that betrays him, Scarlet's mother, who betrays her husband and daughter, and there's like adherence to all kinds of weird, abusive, and in many cases, behaviors that I don't want to get into. But in other words, she gets an opportunity to take this revenge for her father, and in the end decides not to take the revenge. You question would be, why is that? Oh, she thinks that he is changing because he offers an apology to the people he hurt. The problem with that is throughout the course of the movie, he has on numerous occasions tricked Scarlet, pretending to be nice only to become violent or manipulative. And she falls for it every single time, including at the end of it, in which she hugs him instead of hurts him, which he then tries to betray her and attack her. She then gets superpowers because, you know, anime, and she's able to one-arm, disarm, and defeat him, and she's basically starting to crush him to death, where she basically gets an image of her father that says, forgive. So she lets him go, and he stands there, and he rants on power and all this stuff, but the movie doesn't even focus on it, so I didn't focus either. Something about power and the evils and how he deserves everything and he's the true leader and yeah. By the end of it, she sees an image of her father, basically telling her that the aspect of forgiveness was to forgive herself because she wasn't able to save him the first time and avenge him the second time, that she should forgive herself. Which, if the movie actually hinted that that was actually the reason for this whole movie to be made, it would have been great. It would have been a great thing about not holding yourself personally when other people have failed you or have put in situations in which you cannot control themselves. However, the movie made it clear by the end of it, or at least at the beginning of it, that it had nothing to do with that whatsoever. And by the middle, that wasn't even a possibility on the conversation. And then in the last 5 minutes, that became the forefront of the conversation, which was subverted by the fact that, in most cases, the forgiveness, which most people got to, was about forgiving your enemies and not holding them to the same violent standards in which they committed to you. But it doesn't matter because karma takes account, and the random flying dragon lightning thing that turns into crows kills the evil king, and she is freed from the burden of having to take his life herself. Okay? I feel like if I watched this movie while taking peyote, I'd enjoy it way more. I can tell you I've never done that, but I feel like it's the only way to enjoy this movie. Because if you try to break down the ideological, philosophical, or moral basis in which this movie loves to bring up, sometimes so subtle that I don't even catch it, and other times so blatantly obvious that it's basically slapping you in the face like a big meaty ass, you know what I mean? So it makes me wonder, did 17 different writers tell 17 different versions of this story and then they all clumped it together and animated it? Is it one author that was just, you know, through an emotional tirade of like trying to decide what kind of themes they wanted to hit and just ended up in this random situation? I don't know. In other words, long story short, I did not enjoy this movie. I thought Scarlet was fantastic. She was an incredibly good character. She was incredibly well written and likable. Outside of her specifically, I disliked every character in this movie. And I don't mean in the case of like, oh, I don't like the evil character, therefore it is a good character. I mean, the evil character is nonsensical. Why do people follow him? No idea. Why is he at the head of the table? No idea. Why does her mom cheat on her dad with the brother just so that he would kill his brother so that he could take the crown? No idea. Why do his 4 super loyal henchmen follow him when the rest of the kingdom wants to end his life? No idea. Where are they? No idea. What's going on? No idea. Did I even make it to the movie theater? Am I stuck in an endless loop? Somebody help me! I'm stuck in the camera!